In 1870, the agricultural industry in the United States employed about 60 to 80% of the population. Today, this number is only 2 to 3%. Despite this low number, America is a leading producer and exporter of agricultural products. Thanks to research and technology, America has made a huge leap in this industry. I'm Faiz Rehman, and you're watching Café DC. Today, you will meet a congressman who is a seventh-generation cattleman and joined politics to protect the interest of the agricultural industry and his family business. Congressman Mac Thornberry, a Republican, has been serving in U.S. Congress for over 2 decades. Before we start the conversation with Congressman Thornberry, let's watch a report on agricultural state of affairs in America.
Food is the primary concern for everyone. This makes agriculture one of the largest industries in the world. Agriculture is one of the major industries in the United States, too. Like the rest of the world, majority of U.S. population worked on agricultural lands until the Industrial Revolution. Thanks to technical advancements, an amazing shift in agricultural practices occurred over the past century and agriculture became a major export. In the developed world, industrial agriculture based on large-scale monoculture has become the dominant system of modern farming. In 1870, 70 to 80% of the U.S. population was employed in agriculture. As of 2008, approximately 2 to 3% of the U.S. population is directly employed in agriculture. In 2012, there were more than 1,200,000 farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural managers, and an estimated 757,000 agricultural workers were legally employed in the U.S. A large part of U.S. farm workforce is made up of migrant and seasonal workers, many of them recent immigrants from Latin America or aliens working under work permits. The United States is the leading exporter of corn, soybean, and wheat. In the year 2012, U.S. agricultural exports worth more than $118 billion. For Café DC, Mohammed Atif, VOA News, Washington.
Congressman Thornberry, thank you very much for your time, sir. Let's talk about the weather first. We are here in windy Washington, and you must be missing something very nice and sunny in Texas back home.
It's not always sunny and nice in my part of Texas. As a matter of fact, we had big snow just recently, but then it turns to warm weather 2 days later and the snow can be gone. So it changes rather rapidly.
So it's most like Washington, almost like Washington.
Yeah, actually, it changes. It's a little colder in my part of Texas than it is in Washington most of the time. But my part of Texas, it just changes rapidly because it's so far from water. You have more extremes, I guess, of temperature.
Congressman, this is your 10th term in Congress, and you've been a champion of national security. You've been on the very important committees, Armed Services Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence, very deep insight on security matters. Richard Haass, one of prominent think tankers in this town and a former official, he just came out with a new book basically arguing that the security starts at home and they should be more concerned about internal security, meaning economy, the downturn in the economy, what you call is the gridlock in Congress, and some of those issues. What do you think about them? We need to have a balance between external and internal, and how do you reach that goal?
Yeah, well, I think that makes a very good point. You cannot afford to have an army or security services without the government finances being in order. And certainly what we're facing now in the United States is enormous debt because spending has grown so much that it threatens the ability to keep our military going as it has been. So there's clearly a connection. I think the other half of it, though, is that in today's world, our economies also depend on security. We have transport economic activity across borders and around the world, literally at the speed of light. So, but not just cybersecurity, security of oceans, of transport of all kinds, is also of energy. So that's also related to economic growth. So I do think it's not necessarily half of this, but they are very closely connected. You cannot just look at the economy, just look at security, because one depends on the other.
Another relevant question, since we're talking about security, we are into the sequestration, so to speak. The sequester has taken over, and $85 billion are going to be cut within a span of less than 6 months. It's going to affect, most of it comes from basically the Pentagon, about $42 billion. How it's going to affect the security of the country, and how the Republican Party especially taking this, because this is one of their main issues.
Yeah, well, it is significant, and it really relates to what we were just talking about. Because on one hand, it is essential for our nation to get our fiscal house in order by cutting spending. And it is also essential for our federal government to fulfill its first responsibility, which is national security. It's not a choice of doing one or the other. We have to do both. And we have to do both at the same time. And so the reductions in spending on defense will affect some of our military. The salaries for our military are exempt, so they are not affected. It will have some effect.
But that's on the servicemen's salaries,
right, not on civilians. That's exactly right. But what we're going to try to do, as a matter of fact, this week, is pass a bill that gives greater flexibility in the Pentagon to move money around between accounts, so that even though the total is at a lower level, that they can still put the resources, the money, into the higher priority areas. And that greater flexibility, I think, will not take away the cuts, but it will help be able to manage them.
Congressman, I'm sure both Democrats and Republicans, they mean well. They want to see a prosperous, powerful country. But why do you see so much polarization, especially for the outside audiences? It's very strange that the Democrats and Republicans, they can't even meet on a very, basic issues. They cannot see eye to eye, which are fundamental to the stability of this country. Why is that? Why the situation has come to this level?
I think there are a combination of factors, but it starts with the fact that most Democrats are what we would consider in the United States to be liberal, more towards socialist, where they want more government activity in our lives. And Republicans are suspicious of government activity. So there is a very different view of what government should do to and for the people, and that's really where it starts. And sometimes that's a difficult bridge, or those are difficult views to bridge. I also think that the advent of 24-hour news, the internet, tends to play to these different opinions, because there's an element of the news that most of us watch that is entertainment, and they want to make the differences bigger so they keep your interest in watching their network.
So now you're talking about us, right?
A little bit.
Now there's a third party, Democrats, Republicans, and the media. Okay.
In the broad sense. But I do think it is interesting. The websites that unfortunately capture too many people's opinion are the ones that make the more spectacular claims. And that does tend to aggravate the polarization that exists. It is not a very interesting website to say we need to bridge these differences in some middle ground. And there are a variety of factors, I think, that contribute to this polarization. But it does start from a fundamentally different view of what the federal government's responsibility is in the United States.
As a Republican, you've been supporting immigration reforms. So you do see some movement towards the center. I mean, when it comes to immigration and even same-sex marriage, there are some Republicans who are now supporting that idea. So now the pundits believe that it's only probably the taxes, raising taxes is the main issue that these two parties are poles apart. and that's where they need some kind of a compromise to move this country forward. Is it something that you
Well,
think is
I
going
do think taxes is a fundamental issue because it is the huge power of the government that reaches into your pocket and takes away some of the money that you've earned. And if you don't comply, they can put you in prison. So it is a very deep issue that goes to the power of government. It's not just about money. I hope that we can find, for example, a way to agree on immigration reform. The United States is a country of immigrants. That's what's made us strong over time. And yet our legal immigration system is broken. There is too much illegal immigration. And yet people who want to come here just to work, to provide their families, have a hard time in doing that. So I think there are reforms that could be agreed on. The question is there a willingness, a desire to find agreement, or is there a desire to have a political issue? And we don't know that yet.
You must have watched Mr. Romney's latest interview, or may have read about it. There seems to be some kind of a disconnect within the Republican Party with the minorities especially. Do you agree with that thought that yes, the party does not really have what it takes to be more closer to the immigrant population of this country, especially the minorities?
Yeah, I do think it is primarily a question of tone, and it goes back to this immigration issue. A lot of Republicans and Democrats, by the way, are concerned about border security. Any country must be able to control who and what comes across its borders. It is a question of security, among other things. And yet, if you only talk about that in a harsh way, it sounds like we don't want other people to come here. And as I mentioned, every American or our ancestors came here from somewhere else. Even the Native American Indians walked across from Russia and Canada. So I do think the Republican Party does have work to do to make it clear that we want to support this thing that has made America great, which is people coming here from all over the world to work hard, apply their talents, and build a better life for themselves.
And you also said in one of your interviews that the party should refrain from making quote-unquote dumb comments.
Well, I think that's true of politicians all over the world. Don't make dumb comments. But again, not to blame the media, but if one politician in one part of the country makes a comment, all of a sudden with YouTube and the internet and cable networks, it is all over, and the whole Republican Party gets branded with those dumb comments. So I do think that is something that has changed in the last few years.
A sensitive subject now, Congressman. A vast majority of our audience is Muslim world outside this country. And there were some hearings last year by one of your colleagues, Congressman Peter King, a Republican, and also he shares this committee with you, the Select Committee on Intelligence, on radicalization of Muslims, especially radicalization of American Muslims. So that may have sent a little wrong message to the Muslim world that why, just some Republican members of Congress are so worried about radicalization within an immigrant community. Are you aware of those hearings, and what do you feel about that?
I'm not on that committee, so I did not sit in on those hearings. I remember when they occurred. But I think that you've seen President Obama, and before him, President Bush, make it clear that in the United States we welcome people of all faiths, that anyone is free to exercise their religious beliefs as they see fit. That is a key foundation of our country, freedom of religion. We are also concerned in our country, just like Muslims are all over the world, for those very few people who resort to violent extremism in some sort of view that it is their religious duty. And so whether it is here or in any other country around the world, that is something that I think all people of faith can unite and speak against. And that is what we should say, rather than trying to point fingers at any particular faith.
Let's go back to your town, your background, your occupation before you became. Actually, you worked in the Reagan administration as a deputy secretary, I guess, for legislative affairs, and also with a member of Congress. So you have had such a wide and diverse background in government. Any plans to run for the ultimate office in this country?
No. I like this.
You're saying it on record?
On the record, absolutely. I like this job very much because I get to represent the about 700,000 people in my part of Texas. That's where my family has always lived. We've have been cattle ranchers for a number of generations. So they still see me as very odd in doing this political business. And but being able to represent people like them in the Congress and to focus on national security issues, which they agree is the first job of the federal government, that's a good fit for me. And I don't think any other office would be a good fit. Can
you share some of those stories as a cattleman, like from Texas? Because all they know outside this country, just cowboys running horses, on horses or with the horses, and doing all this wild west. We also saw those movies growing up. So I mean, just share some of those, on a lighter note with our audiences.
It is. I have wondered how it is that somebody from a family who has not been involved in politics at all would become interested, even as a youngster, in politics. And what I think back is I would overhear my father and grandfather talking about how we can keep our ranch in our family because there are taxes when someone dies, estate or death taxes. And part of the ranch had to be sold off when my great-grandfather died. And so they would talk about that. And it certainly dawned on me that even though we live 7 miles down a dirt road outside a town of 2,000 people in Texas, that people in Washington were making decisions that affected us. And so I think that is part of what sparked my interest in paying attention to what those people in Washington decided that would affect us.
Congressman, you have seen these shifts in demographic details in this country. It's been changing. Do you think, just share some thoughts with us. Does it really vary the American towns, the smaller American towns, that the big towns of this country are shifting towards the left, and then there is like red America, so to speak, which you see a lot on the map, but so few people in those constituencies. And there's a reason, there have been a shift in voting Democrats. Karl Rove, your fellow Texan, he talked about a permanent Republican majority in Congress. Now it seems the Democrats are talking about that. It may be just a permanent Democratic majority and somebody in the White House forever. So what do you feel? Is it really something that's happening, and does it worry Republicans as well, those small towns across?
Well, I think it is unwise for anybody in politics to say there is a permanent majority on either side, because we have seen over the history of our country it swing back and forth, and it will swing back and forth again. But I do think Republicans have lost the last 2 presidential elections, and so that means we ought to look at ourselves and analyze the reasons for those losses. Now, in the meantime, Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives and had a very good election in 2010. So there are some things that are going right, but obviously you want to focus on the things that are going wrong. I am concerned about the divide between urban and rural America. But also, as you describe, it seems that on both the east and west coasts of the country there is a political view, and the middle part of the country has a different political view. And I think there are a variety of reasons to that. What I do know is that people are moving to Texas from all over the country. There are many people, for example, leaving California and moving to my part of Texas. They appreciate the lower taxes, the friendlier business climate, and the other advantages that we have. So we welcome them with open arms. But in the meantime, I think nationally, both parties need to work harder to reach out to those parts of the country that they have not been as successful with in the past as they would have wanted.
VOA is broadcast around the world in several languages, but certain legal restrictions prevent it from airing within the U.S.
Voice of America is an international broadcast organization which is operating since 1942 from Washington, D.C. But very few Americans know what Voice of America is and what it does. Let's find out how many Americans can identify Voice of America and this building. Let's go. Do you know what this building is right here? Do you know this building right here?
Yes,
What is it?
Voice of America.
So you know what Voice of America is?
I'll be honest with you, no.
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Where are you from?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
I'm from here, from Washington, D.C. I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C.
You were born and raised in Washington, D.C. and you never knew what this building is?
Unfortunately, I know what that is, Smithsonian. That's it.
It's, I think it's a information organization that tries to broadcast objective information to countries all over the world.
TV program, channel, station.
I didn't know it was located here, and I didn't know it wasn't available in the U.S.
Did you know about Voice of America before?
No.
You never heard of it?
It sounds familiar, but I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain as to where I must have heard it when I was in the car, because that's when I listen to the radio the most.
Hi guys, you know what this building is? Right here?
No, you want to tell me? Voice of America.
What does it say here?
Voice of America.
You guys know what Voice of America is?
No.
Any of you?
No.
So where are you all from?
Georgia.
Georgia, and you guys never heard of Voice of America?
No.
Well, now you know. This is right here. This building is Voice of America, here since 1942, and it's an international broadcast organization.
Okay.
Congressman, first I would like to thank you for a modification of Smith and Mundt bill. So thank you very much. And now we have some different perspective on that law, and we can also broadcast some of our transmissions here in this country. Can you please tell us, our audience, why in the first place we had Smith-Mundt law? Why?
Yeah. Well, my understanding is it goes back to the 1950s when there was concern that the government would make broadcasts that could be used as propaganda for internal audiences within the United States. And the purpose of Voice of America and other organizations was to try to help people around the world understand the benefits of free markets and democracy versus the communist system, which obviously was the primary concern. But this is an area where technology has moved ahead, but the laws did not keep pace. And so it made no sense to me to have these restrictions at a time when the internet goes around the world. We have worldwide cable news networks and stations. And so just a simple matter, I think, of common sense to help the law catch up to where the technology is was really what I was hoping for. I do believe it is important that the United States government continue to broadcast, to disseminate information around the world about the United States, about what's happening here, what we believe, and there should not be unnecessary impediments to doing that.
So that's the modification of Smith-Mundt law. See, the problem was because we communicated with the outside audiences, and there was a complaint about why can't the U.S. government broadcast their own material to their own people? Yeah. Is it something that's prohibited for them, but it's good and okay for the rest of the world? Yeah. So there were a lot of discomfort.
And in fact, it was a suspicion of government that led to that prohibition to begin with. But now I think it's a much better thing that the American people can see what's broadcast to the rest of the world and be kind of a check with transparency, and that these artificial barriers that may have had a reason 60 years ago but no longer exist, we simply remove those.
That was our show this week. See you next week, same time, same place. Please send your feedback and comments to cd@voanews.com. I'm Faiz Rehman, and thank you for watching. In 1870, the agricultural industry in the United States employed about 60 to 80% of the population. Today, this number is only 2 to 3%. Despite this low number, America is a leading producer and exporter of agricultural products. Thanks to research and technology, America has made a huge leap in this industry. I'm Faiz Rehman, and you're watching Café DC.
Farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural managers, and an estimated 757,000 agricultural workers were legally employed in the U.S. A large part of U.S. farm workforce is made up of migrant and seasonal workers, many of them recent immigrants from Latin America or aliens working under work permits. United States is the leading exporter of corn, soybean, and wheat. In the year 2012, U.S. agricultural exports worth more than $118 billion. For Café DC, Mohammed Atif, VOA News, Washington.
Congressman Thornberry, thank you very much for your time, sir. Let's talk about the weather first. We are here in windy Washington, and you must be missing something very nice and sunny in Texas back home.
It's not always sunny and nice in my part of Texas. As a matter of fact, we had big snow just recently, but then it turns to warm weather 2 days later and the snow can be gone. So it changes rather rapidly.
So it's most like Washington, almost like Washington.
Yeah,
it
actually,
changes.
It's a little colder in my part of Texas than it is in Washington most of the time. But my part of Texas, it just changes rapidly because it's so far from water. You have more extremes, I guess, of temperature.
Congressman, this is your 10th term in Congress, and you've been a champion of national security. You've been on the very important committees, Armed Services Committee, Select. Today, you will meet a congressman who is a 7th-generation cattleman and joined politics to protect the interest of the agricultural industry and his family business. Congressman Mac Thornberry, a Republican, has been serving in U.S. Congress for over 2 decades. Before we start the conversation with Congressman Thornberry, let's watch a report on agricultural state of affairs in America.
Food is the primary concern for everyone. This makes agriculture one of the largest industries in the world. Agriculture is one of the major industries in the United States, too. Like the rest of the world, majority of U.S. population worked on agricultural lands until the Industrial Revolution. Thanks to technical advancements, an amazing shift in agricultural practices occurred over the past century and agriculture became a major export. In the developed world, industrial agriculture based on large-scale monoculture has become the dominant system of modern farming. In 1870, 70 to 80% of the U.S. population was employed in agriculture. As of 2008, approximately 2 to 3% of the U.S. population is directly employed in agriculture. In 2012, there were more than 1,200,000